It was last autumn when Daniel dropped me off here at Willow Creek. He didn't even bother to come in, just helped the nurse get my things out of the car, gave me that fake, stretched smile he's so good at now, and said, "Mom, it's just better this way. You'll get proper care here." Proper care? I raised him with cracked hands and sleepless nights. I walked to 2 jobs with shoes worn to the bone so he could eat. And now I get proper care like some misbehaving pet sent to a kennel. I remember that ride here like a funeral. He didn't talk much, just kept glancing at his phone, checking messages from the life I apparently no longer fit into. First I cried. Of course I did. Sat on this very porch and let myself feel it all. The betrayal, the loneliness, the sharp sting of being discarded. But then I stopped crying and started thinking. You see, I may be old, but I'm not helpless. Before he brought me here, I took care of a few things. I spoke to a lawyer. I rewrote my will. Everything I have, what little there is, goes to my grandchildren, not to Daniel. Not a penny. I set up a trust that bypasses him completely. When his kids come of age, they'll know who gave it to them. They'll know it was me who remembered them, even when their father forgot me. And I wrote letters, lots of them, to his boss, to his church, to old family friends. Nothing slanderous, mind you, just the truth in my neatest cursive. About how Daniel decided his mother's presence was inconvenient, about how he chose ease over compassion, and then I wrote him one final letter. It's locked in the care director's safe, to be delivered the day I die. Inside there's a story. Our story. How I loved him, how I sacrificed, how I would have done anything for him, and how he threw me away like an overdue library book. The last line in that letter? You could have had more time, but you traded it for convenience. I hope it haunts him, not to hurt him but to wake him up. Maybe it's the teacher in me. I still believe in lessons. So no dear, I'm not just sitting here waiting to die. I'm making sure that when I go, I leave something behind. Not bitterness, not revenge, but a burden, a real burden. One that makes him remember. Because when someone calls you a burden after you carried them through the storm, you don't fade quietly. You let your absence speak louder than your presence ever could. Like I said, Daniel was my whole world once. I didn't have much, but I had him. After his father died, it was just the 2 of us. I used to pack his lunch with little notes tucked inside. Do your best. I'm proud of you. Silly things maybe, but when you've only got each other, every scrap of love matters. He was a sweet boy. Quiet, thoughtful, but somewhere along the way life hardened him. Maybe it was the money. He started making real money after college. Got the house in the suburbs, the wife who never liked me much. The kids I hardly knew except through blurry photos at Christmas. They called me Nana, on cards someone else clearly wrote. Then I started slowing down. My hip gave out. My memory skipped now and then. Nothing too serious but enough for him to notice and twist it into a problem. Suddenly I wasn't his mother anymore. I was Mom, you left the stove on again, or Mom, you're scaring the kids. So he brought up the idea of the nursing home gently at first. Said it was just a conversation. A few weeks later, the conversation became a decision. His decision. You'll be safer there, he told me. As if safety is all a person needs. As if warmth, love, and dignity don't matter once you've got a call button and a plastic mattress. He didn't know I noticed the way he looked over my shoulder while he packed my things. Rushed. Guilty. Or the way he didn't bring the kids to say goodbye. You know what's funny? After he left, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I'd felt the distance growing for years. What broke me wasn't the action, it was the ease with which he did it. But I've had time to think here. Plenty of it. And I decided, if I'm going to be a burden, I'll be the kind you can't forget. The trust one set up? It'll pay for college for his children. Quietly. No fanfare. They'll think it came from somewhere else. But one day they'll find out. I left a video in the lawyer's office for when they're older. In it, I tell them who I was, who they were to me, what their father did. Not to shame him, but so they understand what love really looks like. I made myself invisible in his life. Now I'll be the shadow that never leaves it. He'll read my final letter after the funeral. I don't want to see his face then. I don't need to. The words will do the work. And I hope, God help me, I really do hope it teaches him something. That maybe it's not too late for him to be better to his own children. To learn what I taught him all those years ago before he forgot. So no, I'm not bitter. I'm just finished pretending. You asked any of this to be cruel. That's the part most people would get wrong. People think if you strike back, it must be out of anger or spite. But no, I did what I did because some things deserve to be remembered, because silence is how people like me disappear. I don't want pity. I want my story to mean something. You know, the first week here was the hardest. Every morning, I'd wake up thinking I was in my old house. I'd reach over for the lamp I no longer had. I'd expect to hear the sound of Daniel's voice calling to check on me. But the silence, it was loud. That kind of silence gets into your bones. And it didn't stop there. Birthdays passed. Christmas, Easter. Not even a card. No calls. He pretended I had disappeared, and in a way I had. To his wife, I was a burden he'd finally offloaded. To him, I was a line item on a bill. I saw my name on the visitor log once, penciled in weeks ahead. A scheduled appearance like a dentist appointment, but I made friends here. Not with everyone, most are too far gone or too wrapped up in their own grief. But I found a few souls who'd been through the same kind of betrayal. We share stories over watery tea and 2 soft biscuits. And we laugh sometimes, because when you've lost everything, all that's left is honesty. I started keeping a journal. Every night before bed, wrote down every moment I remembered from raising Daniel. The good ones too. I didn't erase the love. I want his children to read it someday and know that their father was once a boy who danced in the kitchen when I made pancakes, who cried when he scraped his knee and let me kiss it better, who asked me if I'd still love him when After the first month here, the staff started calling me the quiet one. Not because I didn't talk, I did, but because I didn't complain. I didn't fuss. I didn't cry where anyone could see. They thought I was adjusting well. But I was plotting. Not out of malice, no. Out of necessity. You see, when people throw you away, they assume you'll stay where they left you. But I refused. I may have been set aside, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Every morning I'd sit right here on this porch. Same chair, same tea, same breeze brushing past the skin that seen more sunrises than regrets. And I'd write letters, stories, warnings, blessings, pages and pages. I wasn't sure who would read them, but I wrote them anyway, because someone needs to remember us. I used to think love was enough. I really did. That if you love someone hard enough, fiercely enough, they'd never let you go. That a lifetime of sacrifices would build a kind of unbreakable bond. But love doesn't always protect you from being forgotten. That's a hard truth to swallow when you've spent your whole life giving. You know what hurts the most? It wasn't just being left here. It was realizing that Daniel didn't even see what he was doing. He thought he was doing the right thing. That putting me somewhere safe was a kindness. That saying she's better off with professionals was a form of care. He convinced himself of that. He wrapped his guilt in logic and tied it up with good intentions. And I let him. Because part of me understood. His life is busy. His wife isn't patient. The kids don't know me well enough to miss me. And he never learned how to sit in the discomfort of family, of aging, of mortality. But understanding something doesn't mean accepting it. So I turned my pain into purpose. You know the director here, Linda Sweetwoman? I told her I wanted to start a memory circle. Nothing fancy. Just a handful of us old birds sitting around once a week, sharing one memory that still feels real, even when everything else starts slipping. At first it was quiet, awkward. Then Helen shared how she used to dance barefoot with her husband in the kitchen. Then Mr. Turner admitted he still writes letters to his wife every Sunday, even though she passed 5 years ago. And slowly something happened. We became real again. Not just names on charts or beds on a floor plan, but full, breathing people with stories that mattered. That's what Daniel didn't understand. You don't put a story in storage. You share it. You pass it down. Or it dies. I don't hate my son. I know it might sound like I do, but I don't. I love him more than anything. That's why I did what I did. Because sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes love wears steel shoes and stomps back into the room saying, "You will not erase me." And maybe one day he'll sit where you're sitting now. Maybe the kids will ask him why Nana's name is on their college fund. Maybe he'll stumble across that lockbox again, and this time, he'll open it. And maybe, just maybe, he'll cry. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. Because love that endures through pain is the truest kind there is. And the burden I gave him? It wasn't to hurt him. It was to make sure he remembers me with clarity. And if he does, then it was worth it. When Daniel left me here, I had 2 choices. I could shrink, or I could etch myself into the stone. So I started writing everything down. The recipes I never wrote when he was little. The bedtime stories I used to make up when we didn't have cable. The way his father used to sing off-key just to make me laugh. The things I never said out loud, like how I cried in the pantry the day Daniel graduated because I realized he was already halfway gone. I wrote it all in notebooks, spiral-bound, stacked in my drawer, labeled with dates, names, moments. One day they'll go to his kids. They'll know who I was. Not through his version of me, but mine. And if he has the courage, he can read them too. I also left something for him that no one else knows about. It's a voicemail. I recorded it one night after a long cry, the kind that comes from deep inside, from the place where love turns into a scar. It starts like this. Daniel, it's Mom. I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but if you do, I want you to know I forgive you. Not because what you did didn't hurt. It did, more than I've let on. But because holding on to that pain would turn me into someone I don't want to be. And I'm still your mother. Even now, even here. I didn't say it to manipulate him. I didn't do it hoping he'd call. I did it because I needed to say it out loud. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone because they deserve it. It's one you give to yourself when you're tired of bleeding for someone else's mistake. But make no mistake, just because I forgave him, doesn't mean I forgot. That's the burden I gave him. You see, child, love doesn't mean never telling the truth. Love means saying, what you did broke me, and I still love you, but I will not pretend you didn't do it. That's a burden, yes, but it's a sacred one. A reminder that actions matter, that you can't just walk away from people who raised you and expect them to vanish quietly. We don't vanish. We echo. So when I go, when this body finally gives out and the last light fades, I want someone to say, she told the truth. She loved hard. She made sure she was remembered. And maybe, just maybe, my son will be among those who say it. Even if he says it with tears in his eyes and regret on his shoulders. Because that is the real burden I left him with. Not revenge. Not silence. But memory with teeth, and love with boundaries. Now go on, child. Let this old woman rest her voice. And take this with you. Never let the world teach you to forget the people who gave you their everything. And never let being called a burden keep you from telling your story, especially if it's the only thing that remains. There's a woman here named Miriam, lovely soul. Wears lavender perfume and still curls her hair every morning. She said to me one day, don't you get tired of holding onto all that? She meant the hurt, the history. The weight of being left. I looked her right in the eyes and said, I don't hold it because I want to. I hold it because it's mine. And if I let go of it, who's left to remember what happened? You see, when people cast you aside, they don't just want to remove you from the room. They want to rewrite the narrative. They want to say she was getting too forgetful. Or she needed more help than I could give. But what they really mean is, she made me feel guilty, and I didn't want to face that anymore. Daniel didn't say it. But I saw it in his eyes the day he dropped me off. That quiet relief, that breath he didn't know he was holding until the car door shut, and he didn't have to be a son anymore. He thought I didn't notice. But mothers always know. I kept my mouth shut for most of my life. When my husband wanted to move us across the country for work, even though I loved our little house with the porch and the oak tree, I said yes. When Daniel wanted to quit college for a girl I knew wouldn't last, I bit my tongue and supported him. When his wife came into my kitchen for the first time and criticized how I set the table for Christmas dinner, I smiled and offered her the good china. I did all of it with grace, because I believe that's what love meant. But now I'm not so sure, because grace without boundaries becomes erasure. And one day you wake up in a nursing home and realize, you were never meant to disappear like this. Do you know what my dreams are like now? They're not of floating on clouds or revisiting vacations. They're of my kitchen, the clatter of pots, the smell of cinnamon, the hum of the fridge, Daniel's small feet padding across the tile, my husband's keys jingling as he came through the door at 6:07 every evening like clockwork. I dream of home, not a house, a life, the rhythm, the warmth, the usefulness. That's what I miss most. Being needed, being asked, being seen as someone who held the threads together. Here I'm not needed. They bring me my pills and tell me when to sleep and gently guide me to the dining hall like a doll who can't be trusted to walk herself. But I remember carrying groceries up the stairs with a baby on my hip. I remember sewing Daniel's Halloween costume till 2 in the morning, making sure the wings didn't fall off. I remember holding my husband's hand in the ER. Praying beneath my breath like the stitches in my skin were unraveling. I was alive then. Now I'm only rehearsing how to die slowly. You want the truth? Daniel didn't put me here because I was losing my memory. He put me here because I remember too much. Because when I started saying things like, your father would be ashamed of how you speak to your children, he didn't want to hear that. When I said, you can't just throw away your past when it gets inconvenient, he called me dramatic. He said I was bitter. But I'm not bitter. I'm haunted by everything I gave and everything he forgot, so I made sure he'd remember. Let me tell you what I left him beyond the money. You see, I had time, and time when you're old becomes sharp. You stop using it like a blanket and start using it like a scalpel. I had my lawyer include a clause in the will, not for money, for letters, one each year, sent to his house. On his birthday, every year for the next 10 years, starting the year I die, Daniel will receive a letter from me. Some soft, some sharp, all true. The first says, "You were my everything, and I would have stayed in your home until my last breath if you'd let me." The second says, "Do you remember how you cried when you broke your leg and I slept beside your bed for a week?" I do. The third says, "You made me feel like a stranger in the life I built, but I still made your favorite pie for the nurses here, every year on your birthday." And so on. He will hear me, not all at once, but in pieces, just like how he let me go. I suppose you could say I gave him a long goodbye, but the truth? It's not a goodbye at all. It's a reckoning. You've stayed all this time, listening to a woman most folks would overlook. I can't repay that, but I can offer you this. Tell your stories now. Don't wait for someone to find them in a box after you're gone. Say what needs to be said, even if your voice shakes, even if they roll their eyes, even if they call you too much, because when you don't speak, you vanish. And you, child, you were not born to vanish. You were born to echo. So go on, and make them hear you, just like you heard me. One day you're the woman who held her baby through a fever that lasted 3 days. The woman who scrubbed the bathroom grout with a toothbrush because guests were coming. The one who made Christmas happen even when the paycheck came late. And the next? You're just old, just confused, just a woman in a chair who doesn't really know what's going on. I sit in this place surrounded by people who did everything: teachers, war veterans, mothers, lovers, artists, and now no one even asked their names before calling them to dinner. Can you imagine what that does to a soul? To live a whole life only to be flattened into a diagnosis and a room number? I remember when Daniel brought me here. He said something I'll never forget. He said, "You'll be more comfortable here." Comfortable, like I was a piece of luggage he didn't want to carry anymore. Like he was setting me down gently and saying, "See? I didn't drop her. I placed her somewhere soft." But comfort without connection is not comfort. It's isolation dressed in clean linens. They have activities here: bingo, watercolor, chair yoga. I go sometimes, not because I enjoy them, but because I've learned how to watch people, how to read between the lines of their laughter. Some of them are still hoping their sons or daughters will walk through that door one day with flowers or a hug or a sorry. Others, they've stopped hoping. That's the real death. Hope dies in silence, in waiting too long for a knock that never comes. I won't let that be me. I write, I record, I speak to anyone who will listen, like you, so that when I go, I haven't just existed. I've echoed. There was a woman here named Eleanor, quiet thing, never raised her voice, not once. But one day she had a stroke, and when the paramedics came, she kept whispering a name, Tommy. None of the nurses knew who that was. They couldn't find any records. Her family said, "We don't know anyone by that name." But when I sat with her in her last days, I asked, and her eyes softened. Tommy was her son, the one she gave up when she was 16. Her parents made her do it. She never saw him again. She never told anyone, not even the children she raised later. She whispered he was my first love, my little boy, and I held her hand as she cried. That night, I wrote her story down, because no one else had, because she mattered, and I refused to let any woman's name be lost just because someone thought she was too far gone to remember it herself. I gave my life to people who now flinch when I call too often. You know what Daniel did the second month after I was here? He changed my ringtone to silent. I found out by accident. The nurse called him from my phone when I had a dizzy spell. He answered on the first ring. Later, when I borrowed her phone to call again, it went straight to voicemail, so I checked. Silent. Do you know what that told me? It told me he didn't want to hear me anymore. But that's the thing about mothers. We find a way. I started writing letters. Not just the ones for after I'm gone, but ones for now. I write to strangers, to young women in foster care, to inmates with no one who visits, to single mothers trying to juggle 3 jobs, to girls who think their stretch marks make them unlovable, to widows, to the childless, to the left behind. I tell them what no one told me. You are not less just because they made you feel small. You are not wrong just because they don't want to remember what they owe you. You are a cathedral of survival. I don't always send them. Sometimes I leave them in library books. Sometimes I fold them into hymnals at the chapel. Once I tucked one into the grocery bag of a young nurse who reminded me of myself at 24. tired but glowing, unaware of her own magic. She cried when she found it. Told me I didn't know anyone saw me. I told her I did. That's the burden I gave Daniel, really. Not guilt, not punishment. Truth. The truth that I still matter, that I never stopped, that my love isn't something you get to shelve once you've outgrown your need for it. He left me here to fade. Instead, I became louder than I've ever been. There's a woman here named Joan. She's 88. She worked as a midwife for 40 years. Do you know how many babies she's delivered? Over 2,000. But no one visits her. She used to say nothing, just sat in the sunroom knitting. Until one day I asked her, do you miss your hands being kneaded? And she cried. She cried like someone cracked her chest open and let the light back in. Now she tells stories about births in the middle of hurricanes, about holding the hands of teenage mothers. Before you go, let me give you something else. Not a warning, a blessing. If ever the day comes that someone calls you too much, too loud, too sensitive, too emotional, too inconvenient, you look them in the eye and say, I am not too much. You are simply not enough to carry all that I am. And then you walk tall anyway, because we don't shrink for people who forgot how to love loud. We expand, like stars, like oceans, like memory. Now go, child. And don't you dare go quietly. There's power in that, you know. And passing the flame, you're carrying it now whether you meant to or not. And maybe that's why you're still here. Maybe you've got your own pain. Maybe you've been the one left behind. Maybe you're wondering if you're turning invisible and no one's noticed. Well, I see you. I see you, and I want you to hear me clearly. You are not a ghost. You are not too late. You are not a burden. You are not broken beyond repair. You are becoming, even now, even still, especially still. I used to dream about cooking Sunday dinner. You know, the real kind, the kind that starts at 10 a.m. with a roast in the oven and ends at 7 p.m. when everyone's too full to stand. I'd wear my apron with the little blue flowers, the one Daniel bought me when he was 12 with his allowance money. I held on to that apron even here. One day a volunteer saw it and said, "Oh, how cute." And I smiled, but inside, I was screaming. That apron isn't cute. It's a time machine. It's a piece of my spine. It's the cloth that caught tears, sweat, joy alive. They see things and call them trinkets. But we know better, don't we? Sometimes at night I imagine myself walking out the doors of this place. Not with help, not with a nurse, not with a wheelchair. Just me, walking down the sidewalk, past the bushes that the groundskeeper trims too tight, down the street where cars barely glance at the building, into the city, the world, life. I imagine someone, anyone recognizing me, not as that old woman, but as her, as Eleanor's friend, as Daniel's mother, as the woman who once sang Patsy Cline in the rain just to make her husband laugh, as someone who mattered. And in that daydream, they say, "Where have you been?" And I say, "Right here, all along, just waiting for someone to see me again." I started a ritual. Every night before I sleep, I whisper 5 things I remember that no one else does. Some nights it's the way my sister's hair smelled after swimming in the lake, the sound of Daniel's first laugh, the exact words my mother said before she passed, the song I danced to alone in the living room after my husband died, the pie recipe I never wrote down but made with my eyes closed. I say them like prayers, because memory is sacred, and I may not have visitors, but I have a whole cathedral inside me. I see the young aides here sometimes. They laugh in the hallways, check their phones, share snacks from vending machines. They live like the world is still wide open, and it is. But one day they'll be me. And I want them to remember that when they sit in my chair, they were once seen, not just managed. So I leave little notes in the laundry. I compliment their shoes. I ask about their dreams like it matters, because it does. Because I want to remind them. You are already becoming someone's memory. So make it a good one. And now You've stayed with me through every layer of this. That tells me something about you. You've got someone you're carrying, don't you? Maybe it's a grandmother who went too soon. Maybe it's yourself at a younger age, full of light but left behind. Maybe it's a future version of you sitting at a window, wondering if anyone will still care. Let me tell you this. You are not alone. You never were. Even in silence, we were all calling out. And now we answer each other. This is what stories do. They stitch us back together. You asked for more, so here is my final offering for tonight. You are not too late to be loved deeply. You are not too broken to matter. You are not too forgotten to be remembered. And you are not a burden. You are a witness to everything we women held, carried, buried, and bloomed through. So carry it, pass it on, speak loudly. And when the time comes, when you're the woman by the window, you look them straight in the eye and say, I am not done speaking. And you keep going, just like I did, just like you are now. Last spring, a little girl came in with her school choir. They sang old songs, the kind you only remember if you've lived through vinyl records and first loves. When they finished, she walked over to me, her face bright like the morning sun, and said, You look like someone with stories. I laughed, first time in days. Then I leaned close and whispered, And you look like someone who will need them someday. She smiled, but I don't think she understood what I meant. Not yet. See, we don't just tell stories to remember. We tell them to survive. We tell them to build bridges from who we were to who we still might become. And sometimes the telling is the only thing that keeps the soul from going completely still. I tell mine to anyone who'll listen. To the janitor who hums gospel tunes while mopping. To the night nurse who smells like peppermint tea. To the mirror when no one else shows up. Some days I tell them just to the silence. Because even silence can be holy if you speak into it with your whole heart. Daniel still hasn't come back. But I don't wait for him anymore. Waiting is a form of grief too, and I've buried enough things in this lifetime. Now, I write. Every letter, every page, every memory I can reach down and pull up from the depths. I write it all. One day when I'm gone, someone might find these journals. Maybe it'll be you. Maybe someone who's lonely and angry, and feels like the walls are pressing in on their worth. And maybe, just maybe, they'll read my words and think, I'm not crazy for feeling this. I'm not alone in this ache. And I'm not forgotten either. That's all I want. Not revenge. Not guilt. Remembrance. Here's something I haven't told anyone. The day Daniel dropped me off here, I left the letter in his glove compartment. Slipped it in when he wasn't looking. It said, You think this is the end of my usefulness. But I was not put here to be useful. I was put here to love. And that doesn't expire even when you walk away from it. I don't know if he ever read it, but I hope someday it echoes in his heart when he needs it most. Because even if he stopped being my child in action, he'll always be my child in love. And real love doesn't vanish, just waits, not for apologies, but for understanding. If you're still reading this, still listening, still with me, then hear this final truth. We do not fade, we evolve. We turn from fire into flame, from stone into monument, from pain into wisdom. And when the world stops listening, we write it anyway. We speak it anyway. We live it anyway. You ask for more, and you'll keep getting it, because I'm not done. Not yet. Let me rest my voice for a moment. But stay close, will you? There's still a chapter or two left, and you were always meant to carry the ending. There's a kind of silence that only comes after abandonment. It's not peaceful. It's not still. It hums low, bitter, constant. You hear it in your own footsteps, echoing too loud in a room that used to hold voices. You feel it in the way nurses say, sweetie, without ever learning your real name. You see it when the holiday cards stop coming and no one seems to notice that your birthday passed like a ghost. That silence? It changes you. It makes you careful with your hope, because hope, when betrayed too often, starts to feel like a bruise you keep poking just to see if it still hurts. And it does. It always does. There was a woman here named Marcia. Strong, sharp as broken glass. She'd been a high school principal for 30 years, ran a tight ship, raised 3 boys, buried 2 husbands. You could feel her strength from a room away. But one day she collapsed. Not her body, her spirit. She got a letter from one of her sons. Said he was too busy to visit. Said he was grateful for everything she did but couldn't take on more stress right now. Do you know what she did? She sat on the edge of her bed, folded the letter neatly and whispered, I taught him better than that. And I held her hand and I said, yes, you did. But people forget the best parts of themselves when they're afraid of obligation. That's the root of it, child. Obligation. That's the word they use when they mean love has become inconvenient. They don't call it what it is, disconnection, abandonment, selfishness. They call it boundaries, self-care, simplifying life. But I remember a time when love was obligation, not a burden, a commitment, a sacred promise. You don't forget the hands that fed you. You don't silence the voice that sang you to sleep. You don't turn away from the woman who gave you life just because she walks slower now. At least we didn't. I'm not bitter anymore. Truly, bitter is too small a word for what I feel now. What I feel is vast. It's older than anger. It's more patient than pain. It's a kind of watching. I watch the world rush past and I wait. Not for Daniel, but for someone to see me and not look away. Someone like you. And let me tell you something you might not expect. Even after everything, after the silence, the loneliness, the shame, I still love my son, not because he deserves it, but because real love isn't a transaction. It's not a balance sheet, it's a garden you keep tending. Even when the harvest fails, even when the soil is dry, even when the sun won't shine, you love anyway, you forgive anyway, because you are the one who knows how to keep loving even when no one shows up. That's the burden I left for Daniel. Not revenge, not guilt, just a mirror. A mirror that one day will show him what he chose to walk away from. And when he's old, when his hands tremble, when his phone doesn't ring, when he looks out the window and remembers me, I hope he feels not shame but understanding, because understanding is the beginning of return. And I want him to return to himself, even if I'm no longer here. And you, dear listener, you are carrying something too. Grief, loneliness, the weight of all the things you never got to say. So here's my last offering tonight. Say them. Say them to the walls if you have to. Say them to the wind, to your journal, to the mirror. Say them now before silence tries to eat them whole. And remember, you are not alone in this. You walk in the company of every woman who ever loved too much, hurt too long, or gave without getting back. You are one of us, and we see you, even from this little room in this quiet home behind the forgetfulness of the world. I see you. Come back when you're ready. I'll be here, always. Do you know what happens when a person is called a burden for long enough? They start asking permission to exist. They shrink. They apologize for coughing. They hesitate before asking for a blanket. They say thank you like they're begging and sorry like it's stitched into their breath. You watch them dim themselves to make others comfortable. I did that too. For years I tiptoed through the lives of the people I loved. I made myself small, quiet, agreeable. I never asked for much, because God forbid I be too much trouble. But let me say this now, for every woman who's ever held back her needs to keep the peace, you are not too much. You are just enough. And anyone who made you feel like less than that was never equipped to hold your light. There was a day, I remember it so clearly, I sat by the window here, and a breeze came through. It smelled like honeysuckle. And suddenly, just for a second, I wasn't in this chair. I was 16, running barefoot through my grandmother's back garden, hair wild, heart free, laughing at nothing. And then I started to cry, because I realized she's still in here. That girl, the wild one, the free one, the one who hadn't been called names yet, hadn't been left, hadn't been silenced by age or duty or grief. She was never gone, just waiting for me to remember her. I've started talking to her at night now. I tell her, I'm sorry I left you behind, and she tells me, I always knew you'd come back. And maybe that's what healing looks like at this age, not fixing what's broken, but finding the parts of you that survived anyway. Sometimes I think of all the women in here, some with no visitors, some with names no one says out loud anymore, and I wonder, what if we were never supposed to be discarded? What if we were always meant to be oracles, not burdens? Keepers of memory, holders of ancestral fire, silent architects of entire generations. And yet, here we sit, forgotten by the very branches that grew from our roots. But make no mistake, we still hold the root, and the root is where everything begins. So I've stopped waiting for permission. Now I write. Now I speak. Now I remember out loud.